I think what's the watershed between people that get that right and those that don't is increasingly going to be the ability to see through the politics and the smoke and mirrors, base your analysis on the hard trends and the hard data. If you do that on Eskom, a very different picture emerges.
Can Eskom turn the lights back on? That is the question on most South Africans' lips. But unfortunately, the data suggests some worrying trends. Joining me to discuss the latest risk alert from the CRA is the author of the alert, Frans Cronje, who also directs the CRA. Frans, what is the data telling us in terms of the energy situation in South Africa?
Yeah, David. Not great, I'm afraid. You know, the trouble with making a call on Eskom and energy in South Africa is that very often the data presented to analysts or in the media covers a very short period of time. So you'll see, for example, that energy availability rose for 2 weeks or slipped for 2 weeks. What I've done with some of our analysts is we pulled right back from that very narrow picture, and we've obtained 20 years, more than that, of data on Eskom and its production. And an important number to understand here is something called the energy availability factor. And what that really measures is what proportion of the energy potential that could be generated is being generated and delivered. It's the difference, therefore, between what is put out into what is generated and what is broken down or has been taken out of operation for maintenance reasons. And going back over 2 decades, the numbers are bad. About 20 years ago, South Africa was in a position where roughly its energy availability factor was sitting at around 90%. So 10% was out of action for breakdowns or for maintenance reasons. That figure then began to slip. By around 2010, the number was hovering around the mid-80 percentiles, 84, 85% or so on, around that era. But it continued to slip thereafter. The most recent numbers, and I mean this stuff's pretty much in the present, is that factor has now slipped to below 60%. It's the lowest it's ever been. And the trajectory at which it's falling has steepened, and it has steepened through Mr. Ramaphosa's era in government. Looking at the trend lines that we'll present to clients in our strategic intelligence briefings through the year, and there's a lot more data around it than what we've got time for this morning, is an important strategic insight for anyone making investment decisions on South Africa. Is that through that slippage, and it's pretty much a straight line downhill for energy production, there have been so many promises, task teams, war rooms, load shedding would be over by next spring. There'll only be another 3 months. It's only because we're doing the requisite maintenance to keep the lights on. If you look at the data, a lot of that stuff has been false. That's been put to South Africans. What's the long-term implication of it? You know, we try not to be exposed to surprises. We certainly don't want to expose our clients to surprises, so we can be cautious in making firm calls. But what I've seen in those numbers over the past weeks that we've been working on this stuff is that if Eskom has to do it on its own, there is no way that South Africa can aspire to growth numbers, economic expansion, that can come anywhere near competing with emerging market norms. And the implications then for employment, for taxation, for the budget deficit, for the political stability of the country, the living standards of its people are very, very serious. My impression, looking at these numbers, is that South Africans have been misled for a considerable period of time, that there is a workable strategy to turn Eskom around, when the data out of Eskom itself suggests that is very far from the truth.
So, Frans, in terms of the leadership at Eskom, do you think that CEO Andre de Ruyter has the ability to turn the ship around? There have been some positive developments, high-profile dismissals of senior management. There's also talk of restructuring the utility. But does he have the power and the capacity to make the changes that are necessary?
Well, I think there's an important lesson here, even beyond Eskom. And yeah, you put a much better guy in charge in the case of Mr. De Ruyter. Of that, there's no doubt, of course. But I think that beyond that, if as policymakers, the South African government, the ultimate shareholder in Eskom, is not prepared to drive the fundamental reforms about ridding the institution completely, not just of blatant corruption, but of the leakage and wastage that is executed through many of the government's procurement policies, for example, and the political motivations behind these. If your staffing is not 100% and picked on questions of merit and without any considerations of political loyalties and the like, it's not just staffing, it goes all the way to the board of Eskom. If that board is not free to take the hard and difficult decisions on labor, for example, such as cutting unnecessary costs in order to be competitive, well, then you're actually just busy, despite what might be the best efforts of your CEO, with a smoke and mirrors exercise. It's political posturing to create the sense that something is improving. The data shows that's not the case. And the reason it's not happening is that there's an unwillingness politically to drive the hard, deep, fundamental reforms necessary to turn Eskom around. Now, that's a microcosm of the South Africa story at the moment, too. There's lots of talk about investor seminars, summits, commitments, enthusiasm, all the like. But when it comes to hard, deep policy reform, politically, there's no willingness, and far from sufficient willingness, to do what is necessary, which is now extreme, David, given the position the economy finds itself in. There is no deep willingness to pull the trigger on the tough decisions, the hard decisions necessary to position South Africa as a much more competitive investment destination. And if you want to get your investment calls, your long-term strategic calls on South Africa right, and you want to do so through the next several years, I think what's the watershed between people that get that right and those that don't is increasingly going to be the ability to see through the politics and the smoke and mirrors, base your analysis on the hard trends and the hard data. If you do that on Eskom, a very different picture emerges from that you're told by the political leadership and even at times by the Eskom board.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Frans. Let's hand it over to you, our audience. What do you think about the prospects for reform at Eskom? Can CEO Andre de Ruyter turn the ship around? My name is David Ansara. If you enjoyed this analysis, you might want to check out our 30-day free trial, where you can gain access to our weekly risk alerts, which are written by Frans and the CRA team. There you can get the latest insights and commentary on the risks facing you and your business in the week ahead. Until next time, take care.